Well, hello and good morning, afternoon, evening, night, whichever time of day it is for you. This again is George Hartman. I'm doing my second reading from the book of Changed by Tom Cantor. First reading was done a couple of days ago, posted on our Man Up, Men as Trees YouTube channel. I do have permission from Tom Cantor to read this book and place it on our YouTube channel. So I'm going to begin here with chapter 2 called Urban Military Academy. This is again an autobiography of the life of Tom Cantor. When I was 7 years old, I was sent to the Urban Military Academy in West Los Angeles. Jewish families never sent their kids to military school, but my parents felt they had no choice. In a sharply pressed military uniform, I did not look like the troublemaker I was. Here's a picture of Tom in his military uniform. On the very first day of my orientation in military school, they called my attention to the fire alarm. I was told in no uncertain terms never to touch it. Rebellious by nature, I could not resist that challenge. Every time I passed that fire alarm, my hand went up. It felt so good to touch it. One day, my touch dislodged the loose glass. I could not believe it when I saw the glass fall out and shatter on the floor. Then came that piercing alarm that was heard throughout the school. The whole school shut down and hundreds of students had to evacuate. My fellow classmates were quick to point at me as the guilty one. There was no place for me to hide. My immediate punishment was to stand with arms stretched out, holding a rifle for hours. That ended my military career, as at the age of 8, I received a dishonorable discharge and was expelled from the Urban Military Academy. The only option left for me was to be enrolled in a public school system. West Hollywood Grammar School and Emerson Junior High School, and only 1 year at University High School, because my father decided to send me to a boarding school. By the time I was 15, I wanted a stable home life, which I never had. I bounced between my mother's house and my father's house. The problem was that I just could not get along with either my most recent stepmother or my most recent stepfather. There was really no place for me to live anymore, no home for me to belong to. I was lost. Switzerland will clean him. One day I went to the Hughes grocery store in Santa Monica, which had record albums. I selected 15 albums and threw them in one of the empty boxes next to the cashier. I left the store and then returned and asked the cashier if I could take an empty box. I took the box that had the albums. As soon as I walked out the front door with the empty box in my hand, the police were waiting to handcuff me. At the police station, I was booked for shoplifting. My dad was both angry and embarrassed when he arrived at the police station, but he managed to convince the officer in charge to have my charges dropped and my record expunged, with the promise I would receive psychological help. That same night, my father wanted to get a professional to find out what was wrong with me. He drove me to the office of his friend, a prominent UCLA psychology professor. According to his friend's professional evaluation, I was really a good kid. I knew he was wrong. He told my dad that the problem was that the Los Angeles environment had corrupted my good nature. My dad and his friend decided that I should be sent to the French-speaking Monte Rosa boarding school on Lake Geneva at the foot of the clean, snowy Swiss Alps in Montreux, Switzerland. They had concluded that Switzerland would clean me. It was going to be the clean Swiss environment that would purify my soul of the moral pollution of Los Angeles. I knew they were wrong again. The real issue had always been me. After all, my father called me Mazik, M-A-Z-I-K, meaning destroyer. One cold evening, I boarded the all-night flight from Los Angeles to Kennedy Airport in New York City. From there, I was to sail by ship across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe. This would be a new adventure for me. I had never been overseas. Arriving early the next morning, I reported to the HMS Queen Mary to drop off my trunk with the porter. My trunk mainly contained my prized Motown record albums. I had 7 hours before the ship left, so I made off for the Big Apple. It felt so good to be free from my parents. I got back to the ship on time. I walked up the steep gangway to board the Queen Mary. As my feet landed on the deck of the ship, I felt alone. Embarking on this new experience and facing the unknown at the age of 15, I was overwhelmed by the deep sense of fear and yearning to belong. As the ship slowly pulled away from its mooring, all the passengers rushed to the stern of the boat to wave, with white handkerchiefs, their goodbyes to loved ones ashore who also waved with white handkerchiefs. I thought I was the only one on the Queen Mary that did not have someone on the dock with a white handkerchief to wave goodbye to me. The feeling of isolation grew. I slowly made my way to my cabin. Knowing I could not spend the whole voyage huddled and isolated in my cabin, I ventured out. I met 4 other students going to the same school, and all were attractive girls. Things were looking up. The ship arrived at Le Havre, that's L-E capital H-A-V-R-E, France, and all of us students took a train to Switzerland. On the train and in a new environment, my old rebellious nature again took over. I was so loud and annoying to the passengers around me that the Swiss police had to come and put me under control. One of them picked me up by the ear and told me that I was a guest in their country and they could throw me out of their country at any time. With that said, I managed to behave for the rest of the train trip. Finally, the train arrived in the Monroe station. I checked in at the Monte Rosa boarding school and began to settle down. There's the pictures that are in the book. Some more pictures. I'll resume reading. With what happened on the train and what was going to happen, it became obvious that the corrupt Los Angeles environment had never been my issue. It was me. 7 weeks after I arrived in Montreux, the local police arrested me for being drunk and fighting in the streets. They dragged me back to the school in shame. There I was again, 7 years after being expelled from a military school, now being expelled from a boarding school in Switzerland. The headmaster of the school told me that the next morning they would drive me to Geneva and place me on a flight back to Los Angeles, and that my father was going to pick me up in Los Angeles. One thing I knew was that I did not want to be on that flight the next day back to Los Angeles. I had to do something to have that flight leave without me on board. That night, before the flight home, I came up with a plan. Back in my room, I fumbled through my stuff and found a pack of razor blades. I stuffed them deep into my back pocket. Then I waited for everyone to be seated at dinner so that the hallways were empty. When the fire alarm went off in the military school, there were witnesses that were quick to blame me. This time, I made sure there would be no witnesses. I stood at the top of the stairs and threw my books down the staircase, and then I threw myself and rolled down the long stone staircase screaming as I hit each of the stone steps. I lay at the bottom of the stairs like a crumbled piece of paper, screaming and clutching my back over my kidney. The ambulance was called. I was put on a stretcher, and from the stretcher was the last time I saw the inside of the Monte Rosa boarding school. At the Montreux Hospital, I told the doctor that I had pain in my kidney. The nurse gave me a urine container and left the room to give me some privacy. That gave me the opportunity I was waiting for. I urinated into the container and reached into my back pocket for the razor blades. I took out one blade and positioned my index finger over the urine sample. I held my breath and cut the tip of my finger and watched the red blood drip onto the yellow urine. I swirled the mixture. The nurse knocked on the door and I handed her the red urine sample. I was told that I had injured my kidney and had to remain in the hospital. The finger cutting plan had worked. The next day, I was watching the clock when the flight in Geneva bound for Los Angeles took off without me on board. The problem was that I had not thought what I would do in the hospital after the plane left without me. So I just kept on cutting another finger every time they asked me for a new urine sample. Then came the next challenge. Just as I was starting to run out of fresh fingertips to cut, a physician came to my room and told me that surgery was being scheduled to repair my damaged kidney. I panicked when I thought of a surgeon using his scalpel to cut me open. I had a sudden and miraculous recovery. The next urine sample I handed to the nurse was completely clear. They returned and told me that the surgery was not necessary. Another bullet dodged. Now the hospital was getting ready to discharge me, but I was expelled and could not return to Monte Rosa boarding school. I did not have the record that made me a desirable student to be accepted by a new boarding school. From Los Angeles, my father was able to find a new boarding school that was willing to take me. The French-speaking all-boys school, the Lycée Jacquard, just down the road, also along Lake Geneva in Lausanne, Switzerland. I entered the school for a fresh new start. This time, I determined that I was not going to be expelled again. Over the next 2 years at the Lycée Jacquard, I wanted to come home for the summers, but my parents wanted to leave me in Europe. They were too busy with their lives to even visit me in Europe. So while the other students went home for the summers, I felt abandoned. That made Switzerland feel all the more cold to me. I was an outcast. I wanted to feel that I was wanted. I wanted a place to belong. That was not an institutional boarding school. And that concludes how much I'm going to read on this particular reading, the second reading of the book called Changed by Tom Cantor. A couple more pictures that Tom has put in here. These are of the Lycée Jacquard house on Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Some pictures there. And then also one more picture here on the next page. This is a classroom building of the Lycée Jacquard school in Lausanne, Switzerland. So that concludes my second reading. Again, with permission from Tom Cantor of his autobiography book called Changed. I will publish a third video and a fourth and a fifth until the book is finished. It's only 84 pages and we're already on page 7, just finished page 17. So it shouldn't take too long. We'll get through this and hope you enjoy it. Have a good day.